In early 1941, American engineers received a strange assignment. The U.S. Army Air Forces wanted a new fighter, one powerful enough to escort bombers across all of Europe, tough enough to return home with a hole the size of a door, and fast enough to catch even the German Messerschmitt. When the blueprints for the P-47 Thunderbolt were first shown to the high command, the officers laughed. The aircraft weighed over 7 tons, nearly as much as a twin-engine bomber. Too heavy to fly, they said. It'll never get off the ground. But behind the project were people who didn't know the word impossible. The engineers at Republic Aviation, led by Alexander Kartveli, an immigrant from Georgia, believed that raw power and armor could save pilots' lives. They equipped the aircraft with a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a 2,000 horsepower giant nearly 1.3 meters in diameter. To achieve the required speed, Kartveli added a turbo supercharger that filled almost the entire rear fuselage. The plane ended up looking like a beast, thick-bodied, short-winged, and unmistakably bulky. But it was this very bulk that made it nearly invincible. Inside, an armored plate behind the pilot's seat, thick bulletproof glass, and self-sealing fuel tanks. On each wing, 4 50-caliber BMG machine guns, 8 barrels capable of firing about 7,000 rounds per minute. Thus was born the Thunderbolt, the strike of thunder. Pilots quickly gave it a nickname, Jug, short for Juggernaut, an unstoppable force. In the spring of 1942, the first P-47B took off from the airfield in Farmingdale, New York. It was loud, heavy, and drank fuel like a beast, but it reached speeds of over 600 kilometers per hour. Doubt quickly gave way to astonishment. In April 1943, the first squadrons of P-47s were deployed to England. Pilots of the 8th Air Force stepped out of their quarters at the British bases in Bassingbourn and Duxford and saw the massive, fat birds waiting for them. For days, the jokes didn't stop. That truck is supposed to fly? When news of the new fighter reached the Luftwaffe, the reaction was much the same. German pilots laughed when they heard that the Americans had sent into battle a plane twice as heavy as their Bf-109. Elephants against hawks, wrote pilots of JG-26 in their diaries. But the laughter didn't last long. The Thunderbolt began flying its first escort missions for B-17 bombers over France. The early sorties were rough. The plane lost altitude on climbs, pilots complained about its short range and unreliable radio systems. But in a dive, its speed and sheer momentum made it deadly. In the summer of 1943, over France, the FW-190 met the P-47 for the first time. The Germans laughed, right up until the Fat One turned around and unleashed all 8 of its guns. The 50-caliber rounds tore through the Fu-190's wings, fuel tanks, and armor. Protection never meant to withstand that much lead. One German pilot later recalled, "Es war wie ein Regen aus Blei," a rain of lead. The Americans quickly realized their new fighter wasn't just heavy, it was invincible. The Thunderbolt could take dozens of hits and still make it back to base. Its turbo supercharger allowed it to climb to 10,000 meters, and in a dive, it could reach speeds of 800 km/h. No Bf-109 could escape it. Pilots began to believe in their machine. Captain Robert S. Johnson was attacked by an FW-190 during one mission. 20 hits, one shell pierced the cockpit and lodged in the armor behind his seat. The wings were riddled with holes, fuel leaking out. Yet Johnson made it back across the English Channel. "I thought it was the end," But when I saw the pressure gauge still in the green, I knew my jug would get me home. Soon, Thunderbolt squadrons began escorting bombers all the way to Berlin. With each passing week, the Germans lost more of their edge. Laughter turned to fear. German ace Johannes Steinhoff wrote, "We thought they were clumsy, but when they came into formation, everything changed. Now we flew with the feeling that beneath us was a monster with 8 machine guns. When the pilots of the 8th Air Force returned from their missions, their planes looked like flying sieves, holes in the metal, smoke in the cockpit, and disbelief on their faces. How was this machine still in the air?" The P-47 Thunderbolt earned the nickname Flying Tank, not from propaganda, but from merit. Its thick armor plate and 7-ton mass gave pilots something no other fighter could: a second chance. Captain Robert S. Johnson recalled one mission in July 1943. He was intercepted by 4 FW-190s. One round hit the oil cooler, another exploded under the wing, and 3 more shredded the rudder. But the jug made it home. One bullet stopped just 5 centimeters from his spine. The Thunderbolt is like an old friend. It might curse at you, but it'll always get you home. In the maintenance reports, it was noted: average number of bullet holes after combat, 49. Aircraft ready for flight within 24 hours. Even when the turbo supercharger failed, the P-47 could keep flying on minimal pressure and still make it back to the British coast. It was this ruggedness that made it the pilot's favorite. By the end of 1943, the Thunderbolt had become the primary escort fighter for B-17s and B-24s. Every day, hundreds of flying fortresses crossed the skies over France and Germany, and above them flew the silver jugs. The Luftwaffe tried to break their formations with wedges of FW-190s and Bf-109s, but each attack was met with a rain of bullets. New tactics emerged. The leader of the 56th Fighter Group, Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, formed the famous squadron Zemke's Wolf Pack. Their motto was simple: find 'em, fix 'em, finish 'em. The Wolf Pack hunted enemy formations, striking from above and the sides. The P-47 could dive 2,000 meters in seconds, escaping at speeds the Germans could never match. Johannes Steinhoff wrote in his diary, "These monsters come from above like thunder. You hear them before you ever see them." Every encounter with the jugs became a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. By 1944, for every P-47 lost, 8 enemy aircraft were shot down. Zemke introduced the free hunt system, allowing fighters to break away from the bombers and hunt enemy aircraft near their airfields. Thus began the campaign to strike the Luftwaffe before its planes even left the ground. After the Normandy landings in June 1944, the Thunderbolt's mission changed. It became the Allies' primary ground attack aircraft. Each wing could carry 2 500-pound bombs and 8 rockets. Pilots struck bridges, trains, and armored columns. The massive engine in the nose absorbed flak hits, while its armor kept the pilots alive. Captain William Dunn recalled, "When we dove on the tanks, the earth itself seemed to rise up. The Thunderbolt shook from the blasts, but it held its course." In just 1 month after the Normandy landings, P-47s destroyed more than 600 trains, 900 tanks, and 10,000 vehicles. For the first time, Germany faced total domination from the air. The Thunderbolt became the nightmare of the Wehrmacht. The Germans gave it a name, Der Schlächter, the Butcher. The most famous Thunderbolt pilots were Francis Gabreski and Robert S. Johnson, both symbols of courage and determination. Gabreski, the son of Polish immigrants, joined the USAAF in 1940. He flew the P-47 with the 56th Fighter Group, and by July 1944 he had shot down 28 enemy aircraft, becoming America's second highest-scoring ace in Europe. We didn't fly for glory. We flew for the guys on the ground, so they could make it home. One day, Gabreski made a mistake. He landed too hard, damaged his landing gear, and was captured. But before that moment, his Thunderbolt had already taken down an WW2. Robert Johnson became the first American pilot to surpass 20 confirmed kills. Once, his aircraft returned with 95 bullet holes. No other fighter in the world could have survived that. When the WW2 was firing at me, I could see the bullets punching through the wings, but the jug kept flying. It was alive. By the end of 1944, the Luftwaffe had all but ceased to exist as an organized force. P-47s and P-51s escorted bombers all the way to Berlin. German pilots said they had no air left in the sky. Every day, Thunderbolt squadrons struck factories, airfields, and convoys along the roads. The enemy's resistance was collapsing. By the spring of 1945, the Thunderbolt was flying up to 30,000 sorties per month. It had become America's most produced fighter, with over 15,000 built. Even German pilots came to respect its power. Ace Ado Conke, writing from captivity, admitted, "When we laughed at that fat machine, we didn't yet know it would make us fear every flight." The Thunderbolt lived to see Germany's surrender. It became one of the few aircraft to serve in frontline combat units from 1942 to 1945, without ever being replaced. May 1945. The war in Europe was over. Across the airfields of Germany stood rows of P-47s, covered in dust and the marks of time. Those who survived looked at their machines as if they were living comrades. Every bullet hole in the armor, every scratch on the glass, a memory of the skies once ruled by fire. The Thunderbolt became a symbol of endurance. It proved that speed and grace aren't everything you need to win. Sometimes victory comes from strength and perseverance. After the war, it continued to serve for another decade in Korea, South America, and French Indochina. It became the standard for what a machine built to protect, not just to fight, should look like. For the Americans, it remained an old friend. For the Germans, a shadow that came from the sky. They feared the roar of its Pratt and Whitney engine. It sounded like a thunderstorm rolling across the horizon. When we heard that roar, we knew. There was nowhere to hide, said one captured Luftwaffe mechanic after the war. The Thunderbolt didn't just fight. It changed the very nature of aerial warfare. Before it, planes were hunters of other planes. With it, they became weapons of suppression on the ground, an extension of artillery in the sky. When the war ended, many German pilots admitted they had laughed at the Thunderbolt during the early months. It had seemed ridiculous, too fat, too slow. But on every mission, they watched that fat one come home, even after burning, losing wings, or being riddled with holes. We realized that this airplane was like the American himself, simple, strong, and never gives up. For the soldiers on the ground, the sound of its engines meant hope. When the Thunderbolt roared above them, they knew the enemy would not return. It became the embodiment of the power that crushed the Third Reich. German engineers, examining downed jugs, were astonished. The cockpit armor, the supercharger system, the sheer simplicity of its design. They admitted, "This isn't just a machine. it's a philosophy. The Thunderbolt became that rare weapon which earned respect even from the enemy. More than 80 years have passed. Today, only a few dozen Thunderbolts still take to the skies, at air shows, in museums, and during memorial ceremonies. When that massive propeller tears through the air, people fall silent. In that roar lies the echo of 1944, the voice of those who never came home. One of the veterans, Robert Maddox, said in an interview, "Every time I hear its engine, I hear my friends. We were just boys, but it made men out of us." Today, the P-47 stands in museums around the world, at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the US Air Force, and Le Bourget in France. On the plaques, it reads, "Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the plane that won the ground war in the air." The Thunderbolt became more than an airplane. It became a legend of resilience, a machine first mocked, then feared. A sound that was thunder to some and salvation to others. German pilots laughed at the P-47 until it started firing, and that laughter faded into the sky, leaving only the roar of its 850 caliber guns, thunder that made the war itself tremble.